My name is Margaret, and I am 68 years old. I want to share a story. A confession, really, that has weighed on my heart for decades. As I speak, I'm sitting in a quiet house filled with memories. Faded photographs line the fireplace mantel, each a fragment of a life I lived and a love I nearly lost. I often find myself staring at one picture in particular. A young bride and a proud soldier on their wedding day, smiling as if the world would always be that kind. If only we had known what was to come. I met my husband Robert in the summer of 1973, when the air smelled of cut grass and hope. I was a shy college girl, working part-time at the local diner, and he was a newly enlisted Army recruit with a smile that could melt the frost off a January window. We fell in love in a whirlwind of stolen glances and midnight phone calls. By the next spring, we were married beneath a canopy of oak trees in my grandparents' backyard. I wore my mother's lace veil. He wore his dress uniform. I remember how his hands trembled slightly when he slipped the ring on my finger, and how he whispered that I was his forever. Our happiness was real, but it was not immune to the world. A few years after our wedding, duty called. There was a conflict overseas, and Robert's unit was sent to a far-off land to keep the peace, as they said. I was proud of him in his crisp uniform, chest out, determined to defend our country. I kissed him goodbye on a rainy morning at the base gates, trying to smile through my tears. I promised to write every day. He promised to come home safe. As his transport bus pulled away, I felt a hollowness in my chest I'd never known before. An emptiness that slowly filled with worry as the days turned into weeks, then months. In Robert's absence, life took on a quiet, listless pattern. I kept busy by day, working double shifts at the diner, volunteering at the local community center, anything to keep my mind from spiraling into fear. But the nights were the hardest. I would lie awake in our empty bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if he was looking at the same moon so far away. His letters came sporadically, filled with brave words and affection, but between each one were long stretches of silence that gnawed at me. News from overseas was always on the TV, maps with red zones, reporters talking about casualties. Every broadcast made my hands shake as I prayed, please don't let his name be among the dead. I missed him so much that his absence felt like a phantom limb, always there, aching with nothing to soothe it. In those lonely months, I found solace in an unlikely friendship. Our neighbor Mark was a kind man a few years older than us, a recent widower who understood too well the ache of an empty home. He often helped me with chores Robert used to do, fixing a leak under the sink, mowing the lawn, little things that made his presence a comfort. We'd sit on the porch after sunset, two lonely souls sharing coffee and quiet conversation. At first, we spoke only about safe topics, the weather, his late wife's rose garden, the latest brief postcard I'd gotten from Robert. But as the weeks passed, we began to open up about our pain. One evening, as a summer storm raged outside, I broke down sobbing in Mark's arms. He held me close, whispering that I wasn't truly alone. In that fragile moment, something shifted. I lifted my head from his shoulder, looked into his caring eyes, and in my grief and longing, I crossed a line I never thought I would. I did the unthinkable. I betrayed my husband. That night, Mark and I shared a desperate, aching kiss that tasted of tears and longing. In the darkness, my loneliness overpowered my conscience. I told myself it was a moment of need, a one-time lapse. But one time turned into many. Mark would come by in the evenings, and we found comfort in each other's arms more often than I dare admit. Each time, guilt would knot in the pit of my stomach afterward. I would lie awake next to Mark and then later alone in my bed, staring at the framed wedding photo on my nightstand, feeling like I didn't recognize the smiling girl I used to be. By daylight, I could barely face my own reflection, disgusted with my betrayal. Yet, when the sun set, that terrible emptiness returned, and I sought refuge in the only companionship I had. I was trapped in a cycle of shame and solace, too weak to break free. Not long before the world fell apart, I received one more letter from Robert. I remember sitting at the kitchen table with it, hands shaking as I opened the envelope. His letters had grown infrequent, but they were always full of love. In this one, he wrote about a close call his unit had, how a roadside bomb had nearly taken his life, and how the thought of coming home to you, Maggie, is what keeps me going each day. He talked about the future, how he dreamed of holding me again, of starting a family when he got back, of never letting me go once he was home. With each word I read, my vision blurred with tears. Guilt and heartbreak crashed over me. I realized I was holding the earnest, hopeful words of a man who had no idea the pain I was causing him. I pressed the letter to my chest and broke down sobbing right there on the kitchen table, whispering, I'm sorry, into the empty room. That was the moment I knew I had to end things with Mark. I resolved that I would tell him it was over, that I could no longer live with myself like this. But before I could summon the courage to do it, fate intervened in the cruelest way. Then came the day that shattered everything. It was late afternoon, the sun just beginning to set, when I heard a firm knock on my door. Through the window, I glimpsed two men in military dress uniform on my porch. My heart froze. With trembling hands, I opened the door. They spoke with grave, compassionate tones, but I barely heard the words, missing in action, helicopter crash, presumed dead. The world blurred. I remember a high-pitched ringing in my ears and the room tilting as I collapsed to my knees on the threshold. Robert was gone? My Robert, the love of my life. Gone forever, while I had betrayed him while he was out there risking his life for us. I let out a wail from the depths of my soul, a sound I didn't know I was capable of making. The officers tried to steady me, offering condolences, but nothing could reach me through the fog of grief and guilt that consumed me at that moment. At some point, Mark found me collapsed on the living room floor after the officers left. I remember him cradling me, rocking me as I sobbed uncontrollably. When I could finally speak, I pushed myself away from him. This is wrong, all of it. I choked out between sobs, wiping my tears with shaking hands. He tried to apologize, tried to comfort me, but I couldn't bear it. I love my husband, I whispered fiercely. I always loved him, and I betrayed him. My voice cracked under the weight of those words. Mark's eyes were full of sorrow, perhaps for Robert, perhaps for the both of us, as he slowly nodded. He understood. Without another word, he pressed a gentle kiss to my forehead and then left into the rain-soaked dusk. I never invited him over again. From that moment on, whatever comfort or illusion I had sought with Mark was finished. All that remained was a cavernous grief and the torturing knowledge of what I had done. The days that followed were a haze of grief. I moved through the hours like a ghost in my own life, numb and broken. The house was too quiet. I'd catch myself reaching for the telephone whenever it rang, hoping it was all a mistake, and I'd hear Robert's voice crackling through the long-distance line just one more time. But he was never there. At night, I scarcely slept. I would clutch his pillow to my chest and rock myself on the bedroom floor, murmuring apologies into the darkness. Sometimes I even spoke to the shadows as if he could hear me. I'm sorry, Robert. I'm so sorry. I'd whisper to the emptiness over and over like a prayer to a heaven that would never answer. I begged whatever powers there be for a miracle. Please give me one more chance. Let him come back to me. and I will spend the rest of my life making this right. I whispered this vow into the night through tears, not knowing if anyone, God or otherwise, was listening. Nearly a month passed in agony. Then one night, close to midnight, the phone rang. I stumbled to answer, my heart pounding in my throat. A weak, familiar voice said, "Maggie?" It was him. It was Robert alive. I nearly dropped the phone. My hands flew to my mouth and I let out a half-crazed taw, part joy, part disbelief, before it turned into a sob. I thought I was hearing a ghost or a dream, but it was real. Robert was alive, injured and hospitalized, but alive. His helicopter had gone down and he'd been rescued after days in the wreckage, clinging to life. Through tears, I listened as he apologized for worrying me, his voice cracking when I finally managed to tell him I loved him. Loved him more than anything. I wanted to scream it, to make sure he knew despite my sins. That night, I cried myself to sleep out of sheer relief, clutching the phone long after the call ended, grateful beyond words, and terrified by the second chance fate had granted me. A week later, I stood at the military hospital gates as they brought Robert home. He was pale and thin, with a cast on his left leg and bandages peeking from under his shirt. But to me, he was the most beautiful sight in the world. I ran to him as fast as my shaking legs allowed. When I fell into his arms, I wept openly. He held me tight despite his injuries, stroking my hair as I gasped between sobs. "Shh, I'm here," he murmured gently. "I told you I'd come home." I should have been overjoyed, and I was, but his kindness cut me to the core. I remember him thanking me for being so strong in his absence, and for taking care of things at home. His voice was full of gratitude and love. I smiled and nodded, but inside I felt like dying from shame. He had no idea of the betrayal I was hiding behind my tearful smiles. In that moment, I swore to myself again that I would do everything to be the wife he deserved from then on, no matter what it took. One incident from that period still haunts me. A few weeks after Robert's return, he learned from another neighbor that Mark had helped me while he was away. Robert, being the gracious man he is, decided to thank him in person. I remember walking across the lawn with my husband, my pulse racing, dread knotting my stomach. Mark was in his front yard tending to his late wife's rose bushes when we approached. When he saw us, he stiffened but managed a polite smile. "Mark," Robert called out, extending a hand. "I hear I have you to thank for looking after Maggie while I was gone." My heart pounded in my ears. Mark wiped his soil-stained hand on his pants and shook Robert's firmly. I stood off to the side, arms wrapped around myself. "I'm just glad you made it home safe," Mark said quietly. He couldn't meet my eyes. Robert went on to express his gratitude, thanking Mark for fixing a leaky sink and keeping the yard tidy. Each word of gratitude was like a knife twisting inside me. Mark only nodded, saying it was the least he could do. His voice was tight with emotion. I could see the guilt in his face that mirrored my own. After a brief, awkward silence, Mark excused himself, saying he had chores to finish. As he turned away, he finally glanced in my direction. In his eyes, I saw a mixture of remorse and a silent farewell. That was the last real interaction we ever had. Mark avoided us after that, and within the year, he moved away for a fresh start elsewhere. I was relieved to see him go, but I also cried the day I watched his truck drive off, grateful for his understanding, yet devastated by the wreckage of what our choices had caused. We slipped back into our life together as if we'd been given a gift. Robert healed over the following months, and eventually he decided to retire from the Army to avoid putting us through another separation. We moved to a new town to start fresh. In time, we had a child, a beautiful baby girl who became the light of our lives. Outwardly, it was a picture-perfect life. I poured my heart into being a good wife and mother. I cooked Robert's favorite meals, supported his new career as a teacher, and stayed by his side through every up and down. But inside, the guilt was like a slow poison. There were nights I'd wake up from nightmares, my old sins pressing on my chest like a weight. Sometimes I'd catch Robert studying my face with worry, asking if I was okay. I always smiled and said I was just tired. I came close to telling him the truth many times. On our 20th anniversary, I remember sitting at the dinner table with tears in my eyes, working up the courage to speak. But when he asked me what was wrong, I lost my nerve and lied that I was simply overwhelmed with happiness. I was a coward. I was terrified the truth would destroy him, or that he'd leave me if he knew. So I buried my secret year after year, even as it silently ate away at me. As the years marched on, the weight of my secret never lifted. Then fate gave me a cruel reminder of how fragile life is. One crisp autumn morning, about 10 years ago, Robert collapsed on our front porch with a heart attack. The sight of him lying there, eyes shut and face ashen, made my own heart feel like it stopped. In the ambulance, I clutched his hand and begged him to hold on. In that moment, a cold truth washed over me. I might lose him for good, and he would never know why his wife had been haunted all these years. The guilt, the lies. I couldn't let that be our ending. I whispered through tears as paramedics fought to save him. Please don't leave me. Not yet. I have to tell you everything. By some miracle, he survived. After surgery and a grim few days in the ICU, Robert pulled through. I thanked God and every lucky star from mercy. I knew I had been given one last chance, just like years ago, to come clean. I knew I had to find the courage to tell him the truth, no matter the consequence. It took me a few more weeks after Robert returned home from the hospital to gather my nerve. One quiet evening, I made us both a cup of chamomile tea and sat with him at the kitchen table. My hands were ice cold and shaking around the mug. He knew something was on my mind. "Maggie, what's wrong?" he asked softly, concern in his eyes. I felt tears already pooling, my throat dry. This was it. "Robert," I began quietly, "there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you long ago." My voice quivered. He reached over to cover my hands with his, bracing gently. I could feel him trembling too. I drew a shuddering breath. "When you were away, when you were fighting overseas," I could barely get the words out. I wasn't faithful to you." The confession hung in the air, raw and heavy. "I cheated on you, Robert." The words finally spilled out, each one stabbing at both our hearts. I watched his face drain of color as he slowly withdrew his hand from mine. The kitchen fell into a terrible silence. He stayed silent for what felt like an eternity. Then, without a word, Robert stood up from the table. My heart dropped. I thought he was going to walk out of the room and slam the door, but he didn't. He took a few steps away, running a hand over his face as if in pain. I could see tears shining in his eyes before he turned his back to me. I broke down, sliding off my chair onto my knees on the kitchen floor. Between ragged sobs, I started to babble every apology I'd held in for years. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. It was only because I thought I lost you. I was so alone and scared. I never stopped loving you, not for a second. You have to know that." I was pleading, my voice cracking, saying everything I could to make him understand. He didn't speak, but I saw his shoulders shudder. "It was my fault," I cried. "You did nothing wrong, it was all me. You were out there fighting for your life and My words collapsed into tears. Finally, Robert turned around. His face was streaked with tears, his eyes red. He looked older and more fragile than I had ever seen him. He slowly came back and sank to his knees in front of me on the floor so that we were eye to eye. He opened his mouth to speak, but at first no words came. He just cupped my face in his work-worn hands, gently wiping away my tears with his thumbs. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, I saw only love and years of shared sorrow. "Maggie," he whispered, voice trembling. I'm not sure what to say." A tear rolled down his cheek. "It hurts. God, it hurts to hear this." I nodded, fresh tears flowing, because I knew I had hurt him perhaps beyond repair. But then he surprised me. "All these years, I knew something was eating at you," he continued quietly. "I didn't know what, but I saw your pain, and I blamed myself for it, for leaving you lonely." He swallowed hard, and a weak, sad smile formed on his lips.
"Maybe I'm partly to blame. I left you to face the world alone while I was off at war."
I started to protest, but he gently put a finger to my lips, shushing me. "Let me finish," he said softly.
I'm angry, and I'm heartbroken. But I also know I love you, Maggie. I've loved you from the moment I met you, and I never stopped.
His voice cracked.
We've built a life together, a family, decades of memories. I can't throw that away. Not when I almost lost you so many times.
He took a shaky breath and then pulled me into his arms.
I could feel him trembling as much as I was. I forgive you, he whispered into my hair. It will take time for us to heal, but I forgive you.
I clung to him, sobbing into his shoulder as relief and remorse poured out of me in equal measure. He held me tight, and in that embrace, I felt years of tension and fear melt away. We stayed like that on the kitchen floor for what felt like hours, crying together, holding on to each other like two survivors of a storm. In the end, there were no more words, just a quiet understanding that we would carry this together, that we still had each other, and that somehow we would be okay. That difficult conversation took place nearly a decade ago. We spent many months after it learning how to live with the truth between us. There were tears and long talks into the night. Some wounds don't heal overnight, but with time and mutual understanding, they did heal. We grew even closer in the aftermath. I think the honesty, as painful as it was, set us free from the ghosts of the past. In my husband's gentle eyes, I saw the truth of his words. He still loved me, even with all my flaws, and he chose to forgive. In his forgiveness, I found a grace I did not deserve, and it humbled me. Now, at 68, I wake up every morning next to Robert, grateful that I still have him by my side. Our daughter is grown with a family of her own, and we cherish every day together as we grow old. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I'll catch Robert gazing at that same wedding photograph on the mantle. The young bride and proud soldier beneath the oak tree. He'll put his arm around me and pull me close. I ask him what he's thinking about, and he simply says, "How far we've come." I smile, resting my head on his shoulder. I know exactly what he means. We have come far, through war and pain, lies and redemption. Not every story of betrayal finds a merciful end, and I know how lucky I am. I'll always carry the regret of what I did, but I carry it alongside the knowledge that love and forgiveness can be stronger than our mistakes. Robert and I have learned to face the past together, and because of that, we can share the present in peace. In the end, my story is one of hope. Proof that even after making the worst mistake of my life, it wasn't too late to seek forgiveness, to make amends, and to hold on to the love that has guided us through it all.